Hi, everybody. My name's Gail, and I'm an alcoholic. And my sobriety date's May 13th, 1978. And so I'm a spring baby. I was going to play a song for you, but I was tuning up my harmonica. And I decided that I would let you play that music because it was absolutely beautiful. And I want to wish everybody a happy, happy Easter. I hope every day is special for you because we have resurrected from the darkness, haven't we? Very symbolic today for a recovering alcoholic. Okay, so you didn't know quite what it was going to be about. There'll be a combination of some talk on traditions today. But, before there was two sober co-founders, there was a group. And the early members got sober in a group. And this isn't quite as dynamic as when I interview Bill or I put in all those voices and things, but equally important to the future of Alcoholics Anonymous is that we know and understand all three legs of our triangle because they make up the whole of AA. And we're going to talk about the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want to say hello. I think Jerry's on this call. I just had a call with his people yesterday. And when Bill wrote the traditions, which we're going to talk about, and it came to step 12, there was no traditions and concepts. So we're going to put those in today into step 12. Okay. So this is just a brief history. I'm going to go through this quick. Most of you know that I hosted Lois back in the early 80s and that I met Nell, who's in the back of the car here. This just happens to be part of this. She was our archivist for 10 years, and I love this picture of Nell. She looks like she's gazing up at Bill. They were very close. She was Gal Friday to him and a constant companion of Lois. She was like a daughter to the Wilsons. And she asked me to start an archives, and I didn't even know what one was. But I did believe in unity, even though I didn't know the principles very well. But I knew if Akron was ever to get their history back, I would have to work in a spirit of unity with General Service Office and other archivists around the country at that time. There's collectors and there's archivists and there's authors and there's historians. And I put the two AAs in front of what I was going to do, so I needed to learn the entire structure. And there were two people that helped me. They were from Little Rock, Bob and Faye. And one day at a time, when I would get locked up in service to our office, they would give me a principle. And they said, when anything goes wrong in Alcoholics Anonymous, one of these principles is being broken. So I kind of learned them backwards. When something would go wrong, I would get out the literature and the service manual and our pamphlets, and I would say, what principle's being broken here? So if you find them difficult, you might want to follow the prescription I just outlined, which is when something goes wrong with your group or area or district or in your home or whatever, look to see the root of the problem. Don't get tangled up in personalities. And so I think we moved our office. This is new information for everybody. I was going to talk about service to the office and how, you can see them on the wall, but where principles really come into place is in application. And if you're not in service, well, you probably aren't looking to apply them. You're just maybe reading them off the wall. So, but boy, you get in service and they come in handy. So we all pretty much know the first leg of the triangle, right? It's recovery. And if you look at that one little line there, slanted line, would you say that's a very strong structure? If that's all AA had is 12 steps, I don't think many of us today would be sober because that will not hold us up. And so one of the things about both co-founders is they were so different. And when I study Pass It On and AA Comes of Age and Dr. Bob, especially in the Good Old Timers, and I read this stuff and I think, what if they didn't get along? What if they were fighting all the time and arguing? And the beautiful thing about the example that our co-founders set is that They agreed to disagree agreeably. And that doesn't mean they always pretty much agreed, because Smitty used to say it was up to Dr. Bob, AA would have never left Akron. It was up to Bill, he'd have franchised it. They had different views, but they developed a consciousness between them, and out came a lot of the principles we're going to talk about today. So we know that right before Dr. Bob died, he gave his last talk in Cleveland, Ohio in 1950. And that's where we unanimously, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is such unanimity is a beautiful word. And that means when 100% of us agree on something. And we agreed on the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so now, but notice that structure. You notice that it's wide open. Wide open for what? Without the third leg of our triangle, I believe it's wide open for ego to come in. We're not protected yet. It's like in Al-Anon, you learn about boundaries. Well, it's healthy for AA to have some boundaries as well. So here you're looking at the traditions, and the concepts are going to come out of the traditions. There's Cleveland in 1950. And again, Dr. Bob gave his last talk. Dr. Bob, in that short little sweet talk he gave at the Cleveland International, he boiled it down to 2 words: love and service. And that, from a lot of the books that they were reading at that time, is a very, very, very spiritual concept. So let's talk for a moment about service. Now, the third leg of the triangle is going to have to do with service. And it's always sad to me that we get into service without even knowing the principles of service. And I think we think it's for the General Service Office or for our trustees, because kind of when they were written, they were slanted that way. And I think some of Bill's motivation for writing them was coming from where he stood at the General Service Office and what was going on with the trustees. But they're very applicable to 24 hours wherever you're at, basically, because they can apply to business, your family, and certainly to your home group or whatever service you're in. So we talked about Cleveland, but by 1955, Bob has passed. Bill's carrying the weight of us on his shoulders, and he wants to get out from under, and he wants to turn it over. And this is a time where he's very, very depressed. And we are now going to adopt the third legacy, although he hasn't written the concepts yet. But the third legacy manual comes out in St. Louis, and he basically turns the program over to us. A lot of us think, oh, the intergroup office is running things, or the General Service Office can run things. No, it's not what he set up. He put the groups at the top. The rest are trusted servants. And so the groups sometimes, at least my experience, don't always realize the responsibility that they carry in consciousness to affect the whole. Again, that's how important I believe these principles are. And so now we have the full circle and the triangle. And Bill's going to set out to write the concepts, which were very difficult for him to compile them together. A set of principles, most of them spiritual. And the interesting thing is that he's going to learn from our strength, experience, and hope. We don't have to recreate the wheel. Bill, at this time, this is going to be written in the 60s, and there's more experience. The steps, our big book's a history book. The steps come out of history. The traditions certainly come out of trial and error process. And what he's like a crucible. He takes experience and he breaks it down into spiritual principles so that we don't keep making the same mistakes. I think the word is correct. He codifies it. AA, of course, we know when it begins. We call it June 10th. And then the traditions. And then the first General Service Conference was in 51. And then AA came of age in 55. And then the 12 concepts were accepted in 62. And what Bill says about this is, he said, this has been a 3-year job. He said, I found the material because of its ramifications exceedingly hard to organize. but I've made a stab at it and the concepts, which are really bundles of related principles. He starts off by saying AA is no success in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a story of suffering, transmuted under grace into spiritual progress. There were some tough times building these principles. And I think that's what he means by transmuted under grace. And it's a story of suffering, because when you make a mistake, sometimes you suffer. So that's part of it. And, you know, when we think of the traditions, I think the way he came up with those, he just thought is what about the things, say, or do going to produce unity or disunity? And he began looking at the weaknesses of us and how to protect us and keep us in unity. And so this is also to protect us as we're in service together to keep in unity so we can do God's work. And I just talked about that statement. Okay, the unity of Alcoholics Anonymous is the most cherished quality our society has. Our lives and the lives of all to come depend squarely upon it. We stay whole or AA dies. In our step one, it's life and death. Well, in our spiritual principles, he's comparing it again. If we don't, you know, a house divided against itself will fall. And sometimes I get concerned when we have serious resentments against each other of the damage we can do to the whole. And of course, we know our common welfare is supposed to come first. So he talks about if we were to do that, back again in our graves, alcoholics, back again in their graves, alcoholics would reproach us and say, what a great thing AA might have been. So again, there is the circle and the triangle. We call them the three legacies of unity, service, and recovery, a much stronger structure. Notice there's no way for ego to get in. It's a protective mantle, because in tradition two, we've got to try and listen to hear the voice of God as he chooses to reveal himself in our group conscience. But it's really hard to hear the voice of God if we don't have all three installed. Basically, the circle and the triangle was an ancient symbol from antiquity used to ward off evil spirits. Sadly, we used to have it on our conference, but sadly, when I started making jewelry and everything else with it and stuff, we kind of let that go. But it's still, I still see it as a viable symbol. So gave a talk in Texas years ago on the legacies, and I thought about it. Why did Bill call it a legacy? So what is a legacy? It's a gift from the past that helps create a better future. It's our spiritual inheritance of the strength, experience, and hope which Bill codified. Now, imagine if we don't know these principles, then we're throwing away our legacy, our inheritance in spiritual terms. Okay, it's not money, it's spiritual inheritance. And there he is, he's passing that on. Our third legacy manual is largely a document of procedure. Hence, a prime purpose of these 12 concepts is to hold the experience and lessons of the early days constantly before us. So it's sort of like, if you're in service, it's sort of like your big book, right? And I think we'll talk a little bit more, I think one of the slides here, because a lot of times I've been in meetings, business meetings in AA, and I hear I think. Well, what about what we think? And it's far better. You can actually teach them, like whenever I get a chance, I try to say, what about our common welfare? And you can change a whole vote just by bringing in tradition one and speaking it. And if we don't speak it, how are our people going to learn it? So whenever you get a chance to speak it, you're teaching the whole room. But how often do we actually even hear it? We hear the I think probably more than we hear the language of the heart sometimes. Well, did I get excited when I found out they were, everybody says, everything you need to know is in the big book, right? Well, guess what? In the 4th edition, they put the concepts in the big book. They kind of highlighted their importance, I believe, by putting them in. And I'm so glad that they did, because now it's not like it's not like our service principles are an outside issue, right? They're in the big book. Okay. And like I said before, a lot of them are spiritual principles. So the other thing I want to mention before we get into them is, yeah, when you learn them, like when I first learned the traditions, a lot of times we kind of beat each other over the head with them. That's not what they're meant for. In the traditions and in the concepts, there's a spiritual principle, there's a spirit in them. And if we get fundamental and go about the letter, then we've taken out the spirit. So we don't want to put the letter of the law over the spirit of the law as we learn some of these procedures and principles. So the circle of AA stands for unity, and each leg of the triangle, the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts, add up to 41 principles. And I know you're all out there doing the math. You're like, when 12 times 3 is 36, Gail. Don't you know arithmetic, math? Well, when we get to the concepts, you'll see where the other 5 principles comes in. I hope I have your interest when I say that. So, I just talked to Jerry's group yesterday, and I was talking about step 12, where we practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, again, he wrote the 12 steps in 1938. There weren't these other principles. I like to include them in the 12 step because these are AA principles as well that need to be practiced in all our affairs. So the steps keep us from committing suicide, and the traditions keep us from committing homicide. The concepts keep us from committing genocide. So it keeps us in some kind of check with each other. So what are we supposed to be doing? We're supposed to carry the message, right? Therefore, AA is more than a set of principles. It is a society of alcoholics in action. And the sum total of all these services is our third legacy of service. And we're men and women who normally would not mix. We bring all our issues to that table. So how would men and women who normally would not mix going to gather around a business meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous and get along? Well, one of the things is we all have the same last name. I'm Gail, I'm an alcoholic, and Jerry is alcoholic here, and David's alcoholic. So we all share the same last name. There's some unity in that. And I love when Katie and Charlie Parker said, no fighting in the lifeboat. We're all we don't need to always be rocking the boat because everybody rocks when we do that. So the problem of living and working together, this is today our main concern. If we can succeed in this adventure, how about that? Consider it an adventure, and keep succeeding, then and only then will our future be secure. Again, it's building unity with each other. So we all have bylaws and articles of incorporation, and the ones in our office were written in 1954. And a lot of intergroup offices that came before the concepts in 62 never even put them in their bylaws. And so when we discovered that at the office, we were able to correct that so that our office is under all 3 legs of the structure. And Bill's going to say that many of these principles, if you're in service, become like your Bill of Rights. But when I started introducing them, I told you I was at the board meetings, and my service sponsors, I'd call them up and wow, this is what they're blah, blah, blah. And they'd say, well, that's, against the concept, or, you might want to mention this concept. And it's funny, when I used to try to introduce them, I would watch board members, old AA in Akron, they would shake their heads. And I said, oh my God, they're saying no to the third legacy of Alcoholics Anonymous. They don't want it. You see, spiritual principles, the ego doesn't want spiritual principles. The ego, it curtails the ego is what it does. It puts the ego in check and brings out spirit. And they were foreign, they're often foreign, and people initially resist. And so again, ego. So a lot of times, we've all seen it, personality without principles. And that's what Bill's hinting at here. How are we going to put the principles before our knee-jerk reactions to react to something in AA that will reach for a principle first? In Miami, another international, the 35th actually, in 1970. We were given a Declaration of Unity, and it states, this we owe to AA's future, to place our common welfare first. I'd love to hear that a little more at meetings. Our common welfare first, to keep our fellowship united, for on AA unity depends our lives and the lives of those to come. Sounds here like we've got a pretty big responsibility. And again, it'll be mentioned in the responsibility pledge. I already talked about many of us saying, well, I think, and many of us need to change our perspective from I to we. Kind of like the new pair of glasses, right? We're going to change where we're coming from. We're going to keep an open mind and try to see it another way. And that puts the we in our program. We all need each other. We've got to hang together or we're going to die separately. That doesn't sound very good. I love this. I love this graphic, and I use it whenever I can because it's so much expresses what happens when you've got one guy in your group and he's sawing the branch of the tree. Can anybody relate to that? We're all sitting on the branch, and this comes out of one of our cartoon versions of the traditions. And it says our individual sobriety depends on the group, and the group depends on us. And we soon learned that unless we curb our individual desires and ambitions, we can damage the group. Love that graphic. There's some really beautiful literature out on our principles. If you're just new to them, I suggest you get the 12 Concepts for World Service because it's a cartoon. I think Bob McKim is on this call. By God, Bob, I think you're there. That brings back memories when you teach what you want to learn, and you and I, for the first time, were talking to past delegates, and we were teaching the concepts. So I always think of you because you and I worked on this together when I first started out, trying to understand them. And so I started out with this pamphlet, the 12 Concepts for World Service, and you can color in there if you want. It's just all cartoons, but it was really simplified in the beginning. Because again, some of the words, I wish our delegates, and if any of you know a delegate and you believe this, would ask them to make something a little user-friendly for application to the groups. The wording is difficult. We don't relate to it like an AA member would. If you were a trustee, you would relate to it. So I'm going to try and simplify it for you because we want them installed into the group. If they're not installed, you're not going to get the same, when you press print, you're not going to get the same output. And I see a lot of problems in AA could be solved because this is like a screen that catches things before they become a problem. I look at it kind of like a GPS. I look at all 41 principles as a way to keep us on the road of happy destiny. And so you go to them and they guide you. And I think that's what they were for. And when they're not installed, you get a crack in unity. You don't want that. That's that life and death thing. We don't want a crack. And the concepts teach us how to minimize friction. And I've already mentioned a house divided against itself. I think of it as like an orchestra. We all kind of got to play together, right? In harmony together. So the 12 concepts represent an attempt for Bill to put on paper the why of our service structure in such a fashion that the highly valuable experience of the past and the conclusions that we have drawn from it cannot be lost. And so it's just to keep the experience like we talk about when we share at a meeting, our strength, experience, and hope. Okay, this is the why of our service structure. Now, the outside world cannot imagine an organization run this way, but Bill calls it a spiritualized society characterized by enough enlightenment, enough responsibility, and enough love of man and of God to ensure that our democracy of world service will work. Bill was a spiritual architect. When you read the book, you can recognize how brilliant and how tuned he was to write that beautiful book that speaks to our hearts. But then he put together the traditions. And then finally, he did the concepts to give us structure. And oh my God, he's just a social architect. And he spiritualized our society. So he kind of took us from the third dimension to the fourth together in unity. We are sure that each new group of workers in AA service will be tempted to try all sorts of innovations that may often produce a little more than a painful repetition of earlier mistakes. Seen that too. Every oncoming generation of service workers will be eager to change and improve our structure and operations. But along with this very constructive outlook, there will be bound to be still another, a destructive one. So when we try to initiate change, I think we need to be open-minded about it, but we need to think it through because sometimes there's a downside. There's a downside to rotation. So we have to weigh the upside and the downside and not be just so into change. We should always realize that change does not always spell progress. Therefore, it will be an important objective of the concepts to forestall such repetitions by holding the experiences of the past clearly before us. So he's just going to go on and basically, one of his words was prudence that he often used, that we just, we need to just slow down and not be so impulsive and driven when we initiate things. When so animated, we may carelessly cast aside the hard-won lessons of early experience and so fall back into many of the great errors of the past. But what if we do? What if we publish something and it's a mistake? What if we, I don't know, change the bylaws or change the preamble or whatever, and it's a departure? Well, these concepts may then provide a ready means of safe return to an operating balance that might otherwise take years of floundering to rediscover. So we can go back. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I've already mentioned this, but I love this because it takes the friction. And the concepts try to design a structure in which all may labor to good faith with a minimum of friction. This is accomplished by so relating our servants to their work and to each other that the chances of personal conflict will be minimized. I will make a comment on this. I've been in service almost from the very, very beginning, and I'm still in service. And one of the biggest problems I see is that our jobs are not clearly defined, and we have no boundaries. We step all over into somebody else's job. We don't seem to stay in our own lane. And boy, that'll cause a lot of problems in any group, any family, or anything when we do that, guaranteed. So we all bring character defects to the table. And being in service is like, I heard somebody say this once, it was like throwing Miracle Grow on your character defects. And everyone has them. Sometimes my personality jumps out of my mouth before the principle. And I'm guilty of that. And I work on it every time I get an opportunity. I don't always pass the test, but I work very hard on trying not to trigger when somebody says or does something I don't like or want to protect AA or something like that. It doesn't work. So I practice. Many of you know Tom I in the Carolinas. I happened to be blessed to be with him in California many years ago before he left the stage. And I heard him say this, I don't go to AA meetings anymore. And I thought, what? Tom Ivester doesn't go to AA meetings anymore? And then I heard him say this, I only go to 3 legacy groups. And he said, and they're getting harder and harder to find. And I think what he was saying is there's a difference between a meeting and a group. And a group has all 3 legs of the triangle in it. A group is operating under all 41 principles as an AA group. And I think that's what he was hungry for, and he was finding them more and more rare. So, okay. So we know that tradition 1 says our common welfare comes first, sacrifice for the good of the whole. We sacrifice. Now, that doesn't mean that individual welfare is not important, but the guy with the dog and the baby and all that is not more important than the group. I actually got thrown out of a group recently, just about, because they were putting the newcomer first, and they were just all over that newcomer, and the newcomers didn't seem to be coming back. There was just so much attention. I said, yes, Bill said that the newcomer is the most important person in a group. But that person is not more important than the group. And boy, do we get that mixed up. One time somebody called me up, and it was a real important group to me, and it was a closed group, and they called me up, and they had broken the closed part, and they were taking in some people that weren't alcoholic, and they said, well, Gail, she's really doing fine. And I said, well, but how's the group doing? See, so this principle, if we can grasp it, really can make a difference. And we're going to talk about consciousness, but not just consciousness. We have to be well informed. If we don't know the service principles, that's not really being very well informed. So I think it's important that we work on not just consciousness, but a well-informed group conscience. And we'll get into that in a little bit. We want to be able to hear what God is saying. We want to be able to hear that voice. So we're going to have to quiet the voice of ego in our groups with a little bit of structure. So concept 1 says, the final responsibility and ultimate authority for the world's services should always reside in the collective conscience of our whole fellowship. Notice that I've put in red 2 words to help us understand. 2 words are going to play out through all these 12 principles: responsibility and authority. Now, I've underlined and made it blank. This time I put in world services, but how I'm learning them and applying them is taking out world services and putting in my home group or whatever service I'm in with. I put that in and take out world services. People often say, what do you mean by structuring? What use is it? Why don't we just get together and do these things? Well, again, we are a spiritual entity, and Bill did put in some structure. I've already mentioned that. So this confuses me sometimes. Well, it doesn't really confuse me, but I think it gets confusing. So AA stands for a spiritualized society, which means it represents the circle and the triangle. That's AA. But a lot of people put AA in front of anything they want. And that changes what those 2 A's mean. I'll give you an example. When the gatehouse was going to open in Akron, the people on the board at the Cyberling place said, we're going to call it the AA Gate Lodge. And I said, well, you can't call it the AA Gate Lodge. You can't put AA in front of your property like that. They said, oh, yes, we can. It's our property. Well, shortly after that, they got a letter from the General Service Office. And the next thing I know, they came into our boardroom with their tail between their legs, apologizing. And I see websites online that rewrite our program and put AA in front of their title. And I don't know how that works. But, a lot of people will say, well, I'm an AA archivist. Well, are you doing the work for AA or are you a private collector, which is fine, but it gets confusing if you say I'm an AA archivist. So again, those 2 letters to me are spiritual and represent a spiritualized society. So let's look at how that works. Now you're looking at an upside down triangle. Most of us are familiar with the structure, a 3rd dimension structure, which puts the president at the top, which puts the chairman at the top, which puts the CEOs at the top. Well, everything's paradoxical in the 4th dimension. Bill switches the triangle, and look what he puts at the top, the groups. The groups are at the top. So our structure is an upside down triangle. And our consciousness comes down to the districts, to the area assemblies, to the General Service Conference, and all the way to the AA board. It's not something we're used to, and I think it's something we just need to practice. Let's bring it to an intergroup. Same thing. When the groups abdicate the power and the board gets too strong, it's not good. It's not healthy. The groups need to be well informed. They need to send a rep, and then that goes all the way down to the board. That's how it's designed to work. Where does it play out the most? In the home group. That's where these principles come in. But I'm telling you, I see that they're applicable to, well, I'm in an HOA. I sure wish they were installed there. If I had I'm not in business, but I have a family. I've used these in relationships whenever I can and whenever they apply. Now, we all can't go to New York in April and work on the conference. We can't do that. Just like we have congressmen and senators, we're very similar. Bill kind of adapted a similar system, and he said you have to delegate some authority. And we do that. So for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. That's one. So the group conscience, whoops, I'm going to go, I don't know if I can go back or not. Yes, I can. Okay, the group conscience is the ultimate authority, and the trusted servant is the delegated authority. So if you are a trusted servant, you're carrying from the ultimate authority, which is your group. And one can't function without the other. I already mentioned it starts at a business meeting, a well-informed group conscience, and the home groups must continue to recognize they possess all the authority and responsibility. Again, there's those two words again, authority and responsibility. I don't know if a lot of people in AA realize that they have authority and responsibility at the home group level and how important it is. With great freedom comes great responsibility. Disobedience to these principles is death for the individual and dissolution for the group. Pretty serious. But we don't have any AA police, do we? So we just suffer the consequences when we don't practice them. And alcoholism will come back. Come back to your group. So the beautiful thing about the traditions and the concepts are that we have an inventory. And one of the best ways to learn traditions or concepts is through a group inventory because it's so non-threatening. And it allows the group to process the principles and to take their own inventory. I think groups that take their inventory are really practicing the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that group will be healthier and will stay healthy for a much longer time when they keep these on the front burner. Concept 2, the General Service Conference of AA has become for nearly every practical purpose the active voice and the effective conscience of the world service of world affairs. Put in your group. The group of AA has become, my group has become the active voice and effective conscience of our society in its local area affairs. Again, we're going to talk about delegated authority, and where does that authority come from? The group. And it's your Bill of Rights. To be in service without these principles that are coming up is not healthy either, because that would be like no Bill of Rights. You don't know what your rights are. You won't be able to speak to things with the language of the heart, and things can get pretty chaotic. But if you know these, and this is the very first concept here, I'm going to put the second one in because I've got it blocked. Concept 3, to ensure effective leadership, we should endow each element of AA, which would be group reps, coffee maker, whatever, with, well, I just got a phone call. Okay, each element of AA, the intergroup council, the executive board, staff committees with the traditional right of decision. Wait a minute, I'm coming at 4. Yeah. I thought that's what, excuse me, everybody. I thought that's what time I was supposed to be there. All right, I'll try to be there as soon as I can. Sorry. Okay. I thought my Easter dinner was at 4 o'clock. Just found out it's at 2 o'clock. And so we're going to keep going anyway. This is important. So right of decision. Okay, so you have some rights. If your group sends you with a yes or no vote, you have the right to decide. And so you're not a carrier pigeon. There's going to be a discussion and you may change your mind, and the group is going to give you the right to change your vote. So in order to do that, we have to trust. We have to trust our responsible leaders to decide within the understood framework of their duties how they will interpret and apply their own authority and responsibility to each particular problem or situation when it arises. Yeah, this doesn't want to change. There we go. Notice what's at the top again, authority and responsibility. See how easy this is? Just remember those two words. Therefore, some traditional and practical principle has to be devised which at all levels will continuously balance the right relation between ultimate authority and delegated responsibility. Yeah, I put school board member here because I remember when they started coming out with all this testing, and I'm a recovering teacher, and they were coming out with all this testing. And at one time I met a board member and I said, when I started teaching, I had some responsibility. I actually even had a paddle in the drawer, if you can believe that. And when I ended teaching, I had no responsibility, but I had no authority. They took away my authority, but they upped responsibility. And I said, as a teacher, if you would up my authority, I'll give you better test scores. But without authority, that was very challenging to do. I'm going to skip this. Okay. So mutual trust is the key. We've got to trust God, trust ourselves, and trust each other. When I got involved in service at the Akron Intergroup office, I was there for 18 years, went to a whole lot of meetings, business meetings, Founders Day meetings, intergroup council meetings, board meetings, just meetings. And especially the intergroup council meetings, they were run by Robert's Rules of Order, which is fine. But that was trumping our concepts. There's not a lot of it. The spirit of the concepts, if they were included with this. I remember one time it was like everybody was putting on white wigs and arguing. So without the concepts, I think it would have been better than Robert's Rule of Order. Tradition, concept 4 has to do with responsibility, and you have the right to participate. All of us at all levels have the right to participate. There was a need in us to belong. Come on, we were out there drinking. We wanted to belong, right? We come into AA, we belong. But what if we don't have a vote? I've experienced most of my service, I've not had a vote. And what happens is, it's not equal. You're considered kind of like a second-class citizen. And Bill knew that. So he advised us, so if you're participating and have responsibility, that you should include all members and that no one should be regarded as second class. Grievances. This has to do with the right of appeal. I haven't seen this practiced very much. I think we're afraid to do it. I think we're afraid to follow the concept 5. We have the right of appeal, and it ought to prevail so that minority opinion will be heard and personal grievances receive careful consideration. I saw a grievance get served once at a board meeting, and the chairman opened the meeting, slammed the grievance down, and walked out. And that's my example. If you're going to get into leadership, then I think you'll have to be willing to get a little feedback. And if it comes in the form of a grievance, it's an AA principle. But a lot of times, if we don't know this principle, that person might be punished for speaking the truth. And we don't want that in AA. So we have the right of appeal. And we should file reports whenever we feel the majority to be in considerable error. We actually have a responsibility to do that, which is sometimes very hard to do because we don't want people not to like us or be upset with us. And when a minority considers an issue to be such a grave one that a mistaken decision could be seriously affect AA as a whole, it should then charge itself with the actual duty of presenting a minority report to the conference, intergroup, board, and home group. So the right of appeal, we recognize that minorities might be right. Isn't that the beautiful part of our service work? That we actually ask for the minority opinion? And so that's very, very important. And then welcome it. Oh boy, the ego doesn't like it, but welcome it. Because what you're going to get is an ongoing debate on important issues. I like the word discussion better because debate's a little aggressive, but by asserting it, you can open a conversation and maybe change some minds. The well-heard minority, therefore, is our chief protection against an uninformed, misinformed, hasty, or angry majority. This old cartoon reminds me of some things I've seen when we don't follow this. He should be able to do this without prejudice or fear of reprisal. And you can see that guy's trying to give that boss a grievance, and the guy's got a hammer ready to come down on him. And that's what how an ego would respond. But if we know this and install it, then we can operate under it. The guy Tocqueville, Bill knew about him. He came and studied democracy in the United States. Bill puts it in that pamphlet on concepts. And he says that he insisted that the greatest danger to democracy would always be tyranny of apathetic, self-seeking, uninformed, or angry majorities or minorities. So we really have to be on the lookout for minority, because that does not carry the voice of God or the majority. If it's used in discussing systems of democracy, where decisions made by a majority place its interests above those of an individual or minority group, and that's considered active oppression. And again, it could be the majority or a minority can do the same. They're well planned, they have an agenda, and they sometimes use tyrannical processes to get their way. So concept 6, here's that word again, responsibility. And sometimes we have to give that power to a board. We guide the board, but they're the chief initiatives of carrying it out. Same thing with the General Service Board. And so we're kind of like a holding company. And the groups are the stockholders. And as a corporate concept, concept 7, the charter and bylaws are the legal instruments. Remember, our bylaws is what we told the government to be a nonprofit, what we're going to do. So I think it's really important that we state who we are and we follow the mission of what our bylaws say. And this creates a balance. Like the General Service Board and the General Service Conference are like a little teeter-totter. And we're going to tell the General Service Conference what we'd like to have them do. And it's a delicate balance between the two. And almost 100% of the time, they go along with the consciousness coming out of the conference. And if they don't, we have the power of the purse, right? That's how Bill set it up anyway. I don't know if it always works, but we start withholding money if they don't do what we want them to do at local level or at the general level. Now, the trustees, they're the general planners. And I'm going to go on to, we create service boards directly responsible to those they serve. And that's us. Directly responsible to us. The next concept has to do with how we choose those people that are going to govern us. Primary service leadership, once exercised by the founders, must necessarily be assumed by the board. We need good leaders all the way from the top to the bottom. A lot of times what we pick is the guy that goes to the bathroom. The new guy, we're going to help him out, right? We're going to give him something to do. Yeah, like maybe the coffee and some home group stuff would be great. But when we throw him into other stuff before he's even read the book or whatever, I think we should be sending our best. I heard an old timer say that once. We shouldn't be just sending the guy that went to the bathroom. We should be sending our best. So no matter how carefully we design this service structure of principles and relationships, no matter how well we appropriate authority and responsibility, The operating results of our structure can be no better than the personal performance of those who must make it work. Good leadership cannot function well in a poorly designed structure. Well, think about what you're involved in. What is the structure of your business, of your group, of whatever? Look to the structure. If it's not a good structure, it won't work. But weak leadership can hardly function at all, even in a good structure. But once we have created a basically sound structure, that job is finished except for occasional refinements. Great care needs to be taken by the groups that they choose their representatives. Now, they're trusted servants, but they shouldn't boss us. You're going to lead by, you're not going to drive by mandate. You're going to lead by example. Alcoholics will not take mandate. So Bill says this, and I've thought about this a lot, how to do this. A leader in AA service is therefore a man or woman who can personally put principles, plans, and policies into such dedicated and effective action that the rest of us want to back him up and help him with the job. When a leader power drives us badly, we rebel. But when he too meekly becomes an order taker, people pleaser, and he exercises no judgment of his own, well, he really isn't a leader at all, is he? And we don't pass the buck, you know? Again, the word authority and responsibility comes up. Once assured that it has or can obtain sufficient general backing, it freely takes decisions and puts them into action forthwith, provided, of course, that such actions be within the framework of its defined, well-written authority and responsibility. The clearer we get those job descriptions, the better we're going to function. A lot of times you get a job and there's no description of what you're supposed to do. I started out in the intergroup office. What was I? Institutions chairperson. What's that? Okay, I'm willing to serve, but what's that? There was nothing that went with that. And so I think part of our responsibility is to clarify the jobs we're giving people as to what the parameters are of that job and what their authority and those two words again, authority and responsibility. I'm going to go through this. Okay. Is leadership telling people what they want to hear or taking people where they need to be? You know, we're going to get to concept 9 here with leadership. And I have like a master's in supervision. And I only say that to say, I'm afraid to lead. Because what if people think I'm bossy or controlling, or I think I'm being assertive, but they see it as aggressive. And I was always afraid to do it. Didn't want to do it. Didn't want to tell people what to do. That's not what I'm comfortable doing. And then I came to concept 9, which talks about leadership. And I read what Bill wrote, and I thought, leadership and control are not the same thing. I don't know if any of you have a problem with that, but I sure did. And I went, oh, it's not control. Not if it's leadership. It can be, but not if it's leadership. When such an occasion, situation arises, something very vital is at stake. It is always the duty of leadership, even when a small minority, to take a stand against the storm, using its every ability of authority and persuasion to effect a change. There's sometimes I have stood up and said something I didn't want to. I wasn't comfortable going against the whatever was going on, but notice and read that word duty. It sticks in my mind. There are times where I think whether it's going to be easy or if we're comfortable or not, we have a duty. And that he spells that out clearly. But we don't want to just oppose something for opposition's sake. There's one in every group, right? No matter what happens, they go the other way. Let's have it our way or no way at all. And this sort of opposition is often powered by a visionless pride or gripe that makes us want to block something or somebody. A leader must also realize that even very prideful or angry people can sometimes be right, when the calm and the more humble are quite mistaken. So here's an important one that I've thrown into my practice, and that's the ability to compromise cheerfully whenever a proper compromise can cause a situation to progress in what appears to be the right direction. And sometimes that's hard. We want all or nothing. We're all or nothing people sometimes. And this compromise, remember, the most important thing is the unity of the group, not you getting your way or being right. Don't take your eye off unity. So sometimes a compromise can work. And again, our two co-founders certainly compromised, and they agreed to disagree agreeably. Bill also tells us sometimes we have to stand flat-footed. I think we have to pick our battles and not be battling every single thing, but we have to stand for what we believe. To thine own self be true. And he calls that the acid test. And of course, that's not doing LSD. That's just being true to spirit. And the thing is, if somebody has a grievance, they don't have to be right, but we ought never fail to give them a careful hearing. We should be willing to let them modify our opinions or change them completely. Often, too, we will have to disagree and then stand fast without losing their friendship. It's affected me in ways where I don't have to be right, but I do like it when I'm respected enough that someone will listen to my concerns, and I try to do the same for somebody else, even if I think they're wrong. We're told in AA to give them the right to be wrong and not. I've had to learn, especially when people break traditions, to not, feel like I've been socked in the stomach and think it's my job to straighten them out. That doesn't work. I have to give them the right to not know them, and maybe if I'm called on to help share them with someone, not beat them over the head with it. Okay, so he also says about power drivers, pot lickers. These are destructive critics. These are people that are just like to criticize. They make accusations. Sometimes they're malicious. They pitch gobs of rumors, gossip, and general scuttlebutt to gain their ends, all for the good of AA, of course. So Bill's had a lot of experience. I think he's coming from his experience when he writes this. But in AA, we have at least learned that these folks who may be a trifle sicker than the rest of us need not be destructive at all, depending very much on how we relate to ourselves. We ought to listen. Sometimes they're telling the whole truth or even a little truth, a half truth, or no truth. They don't make any sense. I call that nonsense, right? They're just rationalizing. And again, I guess discernment comes in here. So we have to be patient and tolerant. And what an order, I can't go through with it, right? But we must keep trying. So I'm going to recommend service sponsorship here. I don't think all AA sponsors are well versed in service. And if your sponsor isn't, I suggest that you find a service sponsor. It's mentioned in our service manual. It's legal in AA to have a step sponsor and a service sponsor if you need to. It's nice that they're all rolled into one, but if they're not, and you're in service, you might want to think about that. Concept 10, again, responsibility and authority should be matched by an equal service authority with the scope of such authority well defined. It's starting to get repetitive, isn't it? See, the authority well defined. And again, like I'm an archivist and I have a lot of responsibility. Well, there's been times where board members wanted to have authority over my responsibility. And it just doesn't work. And we'll find out when we get to the warranties. So the whole goal of the structure is, and what's characteristic of every good operational structure, is that it guarantees harmonious and effective functioning by relating its several parts and people in such a way that no one can doubt what their respective responsibilities and corresponding authorities actually are. Same thing, just said a different way. Repetition, right? Well, I hope you're starting to, God, I can't see you. I can only see my slides. But I hope you're thinking, even in your family structure, is it well structured? Does the little guy that's taking out the trash understand that? And, it applies to me in many more situations than just being under a board in AA. Then personal clashes, confusion, and ineffectiveness will be inevitable. We have healthy boundaries, right? We're on 11, we're almost there. Again, these are trustees, so this would have to do with the structure at the Intergroup Office of General Service. We need the best possible committees, directors, executives, staff, and consultants. Composition, qualifications, induction procedures, and rights and duties will always be a serious concern. And that's in who we hire. and we learned early on that you just can't expect everybody to do it for service. And if you pay peanuts, you only get peanuts, that we've got to take good care of our workers and those who work for us. It mentions rotation. And it's saying among paid staff workers. Well, our office only has 2 workers. That's not going to work. But I think this is in direct reference to larger operations like the General Service Office, that people don't get stuck and think they own the store. But the fact that our office workers don't rotate can sometimes lead to some imbalances as well, because everybody else is rotating and they don't. And sometimes there can be power imbalances from that. So there's an upside and a downside to rotation, right? And we want them to participate, but our office doesn't think they should have a vote. So we haven't got there yet. All right, we're at concept 12, and I love concept 12. I'll read it first. I left it blank. Shall observe the spirit of AA tradition, taking care that it never become the seat of perilous wealth and power, that sufficient operating funds plus an ample reserve be its prudent financial principle, that it place none of its members in a position of unqualified authority over others, that it reach all important decisions by discussion, vote, and whenever possible by substantial unanimity, love that word, that its actions never be personally punitive, nor an incitement to public controversy. That it never perform acts of government, and that like the society it serves, it will always remain democratic in thought and action. Okay, so we're going to do the breakdown. We're going to start with the word prudence. Bill uses it. It doesn't mean we have this no care, nonchalant attitude because we're just going to let go and let God. No, we're going to practice prudence. What does that mean? We're going to practice it in personal relatedness, in money matters, in our relations with the world about. For us, prudence is workable middle ground, a channel of clear sailing between the obstacles of fear on one side and recklessness on the other. So it's between that. It's concern, especially in financial matters. We have to practice that. Warranty 1. The group shall observe the spirit of AA tradition, taking care that it never becomes the seat of perilous wealth or power. So you might not have known where that came from. It's in Warranty 1. Since it is certain, therefore, that we shall never become too wealthy through group contributions, we need only to avoid the temptation of taking money from the outside world. Warranty 2. The group shall take care that sufficient operating funds plus an ample reserve be its prudent financial principle. Keep enough money to weather a rainy day. The group shall take care that it place none of its members in a position of unqualified authority over others. I've experienced this as well. The archives has a workbook. It's got all our principles in it. And sometimes when the clearly defined authority of board members isn't clear, they'll come in and they'll just step right over it without reading the manual or anything else. And basically what I think is they're unqualified. They don't have the background or the training. It would be like me standing over a bookkeeper and telling him how to do QuickBooks. I'm unqualified. I'm unqualified to do some of those jobs. And so therefore, even if I'm in a board position, I'm unqualified to have authority over someone. So sometimes I say I would love if it was another archivist telling me what to do that had a real degree in archives or had experience. Oh my gosh, it would be so different than someone who doesn't understand archival principles telling me what to do. So the group shall take care that it reaches all important decisions by discussion, vote, and whenever possible by substantial unanimity. I'm going to give you another personal story because that helps bring it alive, I hope. When I got voted in as archivist way, way back, a long time ago, we didn't know if we wanted an archives or not. And the board had unanimously approved. They asked me to come. I did a pitch and they voted on it unanimously. Now we got to take it to the groups. Well, the groups really carried on quite a discussion about it. People accusing me of running away with it. What if I run away with it? It was all that kind of stuff, right? And so they had them actually stand up and take their vote to which side of the room. That's how close it was. And let's just say 50 said yes and 49 said no. Well, we're operating under Robert's Rule of Order. We're not operating under the concepts. So what happened caused me to be under a lot of unnecessary stress for the next 20 years because I didn't have enough support. So when you look at that graph, you can see. And we don't want to do that. You want to keep talking about something until you reach that unanimity. You don't want to split a group up half and half like that. It hurts the unity of the group. Table it. I've learned that in hindsight. It would have been better off if they'd have tabled it and we talked about it more until we had less of such a strict split on that. It affected unity. The group shall take care that its actions never be personally punitive nor an incitement to public controversy. When the sale of that manuscript came up at the Sotheby auction, some of you might know the history of that. And we were going to take legal action. And I think this particular warranty might have come up during that time, that we can't take punitive action by our warranties. Harper's came out with a AA, Alcoholics Anonymous cult or cure. It was kind of a negative thing. And the interesting thing is we never commented on that. You know, Bill never resisted and defended against things. Wasn't very spiritual. So he's been an example to us. The next warranty, the last warranty here is we shall take care that it never perform acts of, that the group or that AA shall take care that it never perform acts of government and like the society it serves, it will always remain democratic in thought and action. I love that. It's a great inventory question. The concepts remind us that each of us have final responsibility for AA. We respect each member's dignity, worth, and need to belong. We promote everyone's right to be heard and to participate in that which affects each of them. Is that taking place in your family? And is that taking place in your business? And if you don't relate to this at an AA level, isn't that in a relationship? You know, everybody just wants to be heard, even if they're wrong. It's just respect. It's just respect for God's kids. And that we cannot meet this responsibility without delegating much of it to trusted servants. We send along the authority to match it, to maintain a system of checks and balances and our service entities to ensure that authority not outpace nor lag responsibility. Therefore, we expect that our group will always act in a spirit of mutual respect and love, one member for another. Mutual trust should prevail. No action ought to be taken in anger, haste, or recklessness. That care will be observed to respect and preserve all minorities, that no action should ever be personally punitive, that whenever possible, important actions will be taken in substantial unanimity, and that our group will ever be prudently on guard against tyrannies, great or small, whether they be found in the majority or in the minority. This to the end that our great blessings may never spoil us, and that we shall forever live in thankful contemplation of him who presides over us all. Freedom under God to grow in his likeness and image will ever be the quest of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you, and I apologize for that phone call. And I certainly hope that understanding these principles helps you in your walk in AA, because now you have the Bill of Rights, and now you know and can speak them when you're called upon in a group. Thank you so much for listening. Happy Easter.